Hello and welcome to our session today. How will flexible working change how we work after the pandemic? So, hope you're in the correct session because we've just had the world's largest experiment of remote working. I want to extend that thought a little bit further and extend that into flexible working and talk about today about how is that going to impact people? How's that going to impact organisations, and what are some of the challenges associated with that as well? So a couple of admin aspects before we get into today. There is a code of conduct for this presentation and for the whole webinar series. And the code of conduct is that we want to have no harassment and treat people nicely. So you can read it for yourself. There is a longer version available on our website. So if you are interested in seeing the longer version, then just type code of conduct into the comments and our moderator will put the link for that. All right. Now, like all seminars, whether they're in person or whether they're via the web, they can't happen without sponsors. And we'd really like to thank our sponsors for putting this together. There's so many hours of work that's gone into bringing this whole webinar series together, not only from the sponsors, but for the people who work behind the scenes, who've worked multiple weekends and worked literally around the clock. So I really want to take my hat off and appreciate those people. Throughout this presentation, there will be a prize that I'll put up a screen where you have to pull out your phone and scan a QR code. So have your phones ready. That'll pop up at some stage throughout the presentation. So just to keep you on your toes and keep you alert. So let's get into the detail. So a little bit about me. So picture in the middle is obviously me. That's me working from home. Like a lot of you, well, I've got 2 university students working from home or doing the university studies from home. I've got a high school student who's fortunately gone back to school this week, but he's been doing remote schooling from home. My wife works from home and I work from home. That photo in the middle is taken from my lounge room where I was conducting another webinar because I've had to move around through different places. We've had to share spaces depending on who's doing what. But my first job was actually in a very traditional company, and it was really interesting. It was called Modern Printing Company. It was a 100-year-old company. It was a very, very archaic company. So that was in the mid-1980s, and everything was paper-based. So everything was done manually. And so I got in at the very ground level, just checking stock take records and things like that, and then graduated up through the ranks within that company. So got a great understanding how things worked. In the late 80s, I actually got into IT and I spent nearly 20 years in IT. And because I knew how manual systems worked really well, then automating things and systemizing manual processes, I took to that like a duck to water. It was very, very easy for me to comprehend. So implementing large-scale business systems. And when you're a consultant, what you have to do, you have to work out on the customer sites. You have to work in cafes. You have to work in your car sometimes and work from home at the end of a consulting day. So got a lot of practice and experience of working from home. Since 2007, my focus has been on productivity from a people perspective. So it's been about how can we help people achieve their outcomes in less time. And it's been a culmination of all of my experiences I've learned through the manual processes, through the automation of IT, and then through the people perspective. So how can they do their best work all the time? And what I find with people, it's irrespective whether they're working in an office or working from home, what we have to do now is work anywhere. And that book there, I wrote in 2016 for the IT sector, and it was rapid response of how IT executives deliver excellence. So let's get into further detail. So what has the coronavirus pandemic caused to Australian workers? So 46% of Australian workers have worked from home over that March to May period. Now, I was surprised when I saw that because I thought the number would have been a little bit higher than 46%. But there's a lot of people who are working for essential services or jobs that actually can't actually be worked from home. Now, the assumption that people have is that just because they work effectively from an office means they work effectively from home, and that's absolutely not the case, because some people have done it really well. So people have had experience of working from home. It was no change for them. But for a number of others, they've found that transition difficult. They found that transition difficult because they could be homeschooling. They might be in a very small environment. They may not have dedicated workspaces. They might be working off a kitchen table, and it just hasn't been ideal for them. So there's been nearly half the Australian workforce has worked from home, and there's been mixed results from that. If you look at it from a Microsoft Teams perspective, the number of average daily users started at 32 million on the 11th of March, which skyrocketed to 44 million on the 18th of March, and in the end of April, that's 75 million. So it's nearly 250% growth. And that's happened because as organisations have extended their usage of Teams, or there's been a lot of greenfield sites, so they may have had Teams and they may not have turned it on, or they may have just acquired Teams, and it's been the way of getting their users and their teams to collaborate and to have their video conference calls and all of that. So anyone who's had a role in deploying Teams has worked flat out over this period of time. There's an article that I saw on Bloomberg 2 weeks ago, and it said the average workday has increased by 3 hours by working from home. And that's increased for a variety of reasons. So in some cases, people are just more ineffective working from home. So they're having to work longer to get the same amount of work done. And that's even taken away commuting that they don't have to do that going into the office, but they're working longer hours. There could be people who are homeschooling and they're getting interrupted by the children throughout the day, so they're having to work later at night to catch up on their work. And there could also be other situations where they haven't got the right information, or people can't get away from work. They're seeing their laptop there and they can't walk past it, and they're always tending to pick it up and I'll just do a little bit more work, and the workday is extending. There was a study done just recently by Monash University that said 31% of people are suffering from severe psychological distress during the pandemic. And that's partly because of the challenges of working from home. That's partly because of the job insecurity. That's partly because of the homeschooling. But what's relevant is nearly a third of the population is quite fragile at the moment when it comes to work. So we've got to really focus about how can we work effectively? How can we make life easier for people to get their job done? Now, there are 3 levels of remote working. And when I look at working, I always think of things that they need to be scalable and that they need to be sustainable. So if you think about when the coronavirus first hit, so the immediate reaction was that businesses that we got them to work from home. And that was just a pure deployment strategy. So get them working from home, make sure they've got a laptop, make sure they've got access into the firewall, that they can access our systems, and let's just get them working. And that's a really hit and miss strategy. And that's where Microsoft Teams got deployed in a lot of situations as well. But as I say, it's really hit and miss because some people have adapted to it really, really well, whilst others haven't, and they've been a little bit ineffective throughout that process. So with this deployment, the question becomes, is it scalable and is it sustainable over the longer term? And for people that it's working from because they're more advanced, then yes, it probably is. But for the others, it isn't necessarily happening. So when an organisation is in this phase, the next step that they can do is they can look back and they start saying, well, hang on, we're struggling with this a little bit. So what can we do to improve? And this highlights the people in the organisation who need some help with their personal productivity. So they need a little bit of coaching, a little bit of training, so that they can get more done in less time. It's also what improvements can be made from teams. What are the protocols that can be put in place to actually get the teams to really start understanding and really start collaborating well? So Where do I go to get certain piece of information? If I'm doing Teams videos, for instance, do we expect the video camera to be on? When is it okay? When isn't it okay? And what was really interesting, if I come back to the deployment phase, when we first deployed work from home, what did managers do? Well, a lot of managers felt that they needed to communicate more to their individuals and more to their teams. And in actual fact, there were more meetings being scheduled. There was more micromanaging going on. And all we did successfully was increase workloads on individuals. So we're making life harder, and that wasn't the intent, but that's what's happened. And one of the biggest complaints I've heard over this phase has been how my manager is micromanaging me. So in the improvement stage, there's a bunch of improvements we can do, whether that be for people, whether that be for processes, whether that be for systems. But the next phase is the flexible work phase. And flexible working is really about how can I be flexible with the employees that I've got. What are their hours? What are their outputs? How are they going to be working in the office? Are they going to be working out of the office? I've got some, I don't want to give away all the thunder here because I've got some slides. I want to break that down in a little bit more detail. But the phases we go through: pure deployment, which has a life cycle on it. We go through an improvement phase, and some organisations get stuck in that deployment phase. There's other organisations who get into the improvement phase and they're getting a great return, and the people are feeling comfortable, hey, I can make this work. And then there's the flexible phase, which is where it's really going to change too. So if you pull out your cameras and scan this QR code, you'll get entered into a prize, and the winners will be announced, not during this webinar, but they'll be announced later on. So I'll give you a moment to take a scan of that. Okay, hopefully you've had enough time. So I'm going to keep moving because I want to leave some time for some questions later on. Now, if anyone does have any questions, please add them to the comments and we'll respond to your questions later on. Okay, so one of the benefits of flexible working is access to top talent. So if you think about a young family, so an very average family where there's husband and wife and there's 3 young children. Now, what typically happens is one of the parents may actually take some time off from work with the birth of the child. Now, in a flexible work environment, what could be possible is one of those parents, instead of taking all the time off, could actually work for part of the day. So they might just work for 2 hours. There might be something. So they're not losing that talent. So there might be something very specifically that their skill set is that they can fit in around raising the family. So that's one way of doing it. So we've got access to top talent. There could be people who want to semi-retire who still want to keep their hat in the ring, or the organisation doesn't want to lose them. So there's a whole variety of ways, because work is not where we do it, it's what we do. So let me say that again, work is not where we do it, it's what we do. So flexible working is all about what we do. What we do, whether we're doing that from home or whether they're doing that in the office. There is a flip side of this though. And the flip side of this is that organisations have had a remote workforce since March. Many organisations had never ever considered having a remote workforce. And they are looking at it and saying, well, this kind of does work. But what this does, this opens up a global workforce is where they could be going to get their skills. And I know some organisations are now looking at outsourcing to lower cost economies. And a lot of people aren't talking about this. This is a thing that's sort of swept under the carpet and it's hidden at the moment, but it's real and it's one of the challenges going on. So if I'm an individual, I'm not saying this just to scare anybody, it's really, really important that I demonstrate my value, that I demonstrate my value every day, that I demonstrate my value every week. So personal productivity and soft skills are really high levels of importance now, so that we're demonstrating value so we can keep our jobs and we can also grow and strive in this environment with what's going on at the moment. Now, there may be some circuit breakers. There's some things that we need to do differently that are holding us back from getting to a flexible working environment. And I want to step through these. I want to give you 3 suggestions and 3 ideas. The first one is meetings. So as I said before, in the early stages of remote working, organisations, they want to touch their people more. They want to talk to their people more. So we increased the level of meetings, but it's exhausting being on video conferencing all day. And we are paid to do our job. So if I'm in meetings all day, when do I do my job? Well, it's either at the start of the day, so really early in the morning, or at the end of the day, so it's in the evening or at night time. And so we've got to really think about how many meetings we're having. So before the coronavirus pandemic, the average professional went to 62 meetings a month, and 50% of meetings were wasted, 50% of meeting times were wasted, and 67% of meetings were found to be ineffective. So these are really, really damning stats. So we've got to have a really good look at through a different lens of how do we conduct meetings, and what's the best way of doing remote meetings. If you want to get engagement with somebody, the best thing is to ask them a question. So we've almost got to flip meetings of how we handle meetings. So we've got to be more ask than tell. So there's an example of an organisation of what they do. At the first 10 minutes of their meeting is actually reading status reports. So instead of someone getting up and saying and flipping over to them of their 5 minutes to talk about what they've done since the last meeting, they actually put it together in a very simple status report that's on the central server. So the first 10 minutes is silence, where people are reading these status reports, and then everyone in the meeting gets a 5-minute window to ask questions to anyone of any of the status reports. And what that does, it really drills down and focuses in on what's the important points. What are the decisions we need to make, rather than just taking up air and taking up time in talking about what have we done. So we should look at how many meetings that we're going to have, what's the duration of those meetings, and what's the format of those meetings. And if we can get this right, there's a huge productivity improvement here. And this makes flexible working so much easier. If you think about, if I was involved in less meetings per month, how much more time would I have to be able to do my job? How could I integrate my work life and family better if there was less meetings to be involved? Because in the top 3 list, when I talk to people from a productivity sense, so why can't you get your job done? There's too many meetings, there's too many emails, there's too many interruptions. And what we're getting at the moment, we've got the meetings, we're getting interruptions via instant messaging, so we're not getting it in the office, and we're still getting too many emails. So we've got to focus on these things if we want to be able to really, really embrace flexible working and get the benefits from it. The second one is we really need to look at how we measure employee performance. So too many organisations still measure employee performance based on hours, based on what time the individual arrives at the office versus what time they leave. In a flexible work environment, the measurement is on outcomes. So what's the outcomes that I'm getting from the individual? And it's got to be self-measured. So, and to be able to do that and do this well, then we have to know what's the expected outcomes. And if we understand what the expected outcomes are, then someone can actually measure them. Now, there are things that happen throughout business, throughout the days and weeks, where there's unexpected things that happen. And sometimes that's an explained variance as to why the outcomes didn't align to what the expected measurement was. However, there's also people in organisations who tend to keep on missing, because the issue isn't what's going on in the environment. The issue is a people-related issue. So if we get self-measurement and get this correctly, then we don't have to micromanage, because this is self-feeding, this is self-monitoring, self-checking. So then for check-ins from a leader to their team is really, how can I help you? So it's a different lens completely of how we're managing and the focus. So we're not wasting as much time in micromanaging, but we're actually really increasing the value that we're providing to our teams. So it's for leaders to be really unlocking the doors for their teams to be successful. And what we need is we need empowered teams. And who would have thought Vanilla Ice, when he wrote his song and sung his song in the early 90s, would be a business visionary with stop, collaborate and listen? Because we've really got to stop. We've really got to stop and reassess how we're collaborating. What's just wasting time? What's effective collaboration that we need to do? So what we find with a lot of people who work from home is they tend to procrastinate more. And they tend to procrastinate more because they're getting to a certain level and they can't get the information. They're unsure. And if they can't go and get onto someone to find out, then the wheels are spinning as such. And this is really we've got to give if we want to get. So we need teams that are empowered teams that support each other. We need our channels set up correctly on things like Microsoft Teams, and whether that's using Yammer through Microsoft, is that we've got to use the tool sets so we can get information quickly, and that we've got to have this culture embedded in that we're sharing information, we're supporting teammates where we need to. So sure, we've got to get our own work done, but it's not all me, that we've got to be there for the team as well. And when we're able to do that, then the culture just grows, it's feeding on itself, and we've got a really, really high performing team. That's when flexible working really works. So remote working, the big change that we're going to see is it's actually going to be work from anywhere. So there are some people who cannot wait to get back to the offices when the pandemic's over, because they're just ineffective from working from home. They want that social interaction. There's a whole variety of reasons that they've got. There are other people and organisations that are saying, hey, this works. So we want our people to be able to work from anywhere. So whether that's work from home, whether that's working from a co-working space, a cafe, whether that's working some days in the office. And that's the biggest change that we're going to see coming up. So what we've got to be able to do is we've got to be able to reduce the time we're wasting in meetings. We've got to be able to get the right performance measures in place and self-measures and self-checking in place so it just runs. And we've got to be able to get high-performing teams who collaborate effectively together. And when we're able to do that, we've embraced flexible working, but we've really embraced this concept of work from anywhere, and we're going to see a lot of changes in this in coming up. So I wanted to leave some time for questions today, and I cannot see the screen as I'm on my PowerPoint, so I'm going to throw to our moderator, Lorian, if there's any questions there. And feel free, if you haven't put in a question, to add that now, because I've left 5 minutes for questions here. And there's my details. If you want to get in touch, if you've got any questions, or if you want to explore this anymore, feel free to reach out at some stage.
So Glenn, one question you have is from Cairo, which is, she says, this is a side question. What purpose did you have in mind for your book? How did you market and distribute it? And did you consider it successful? Any advice for a business looking to put their knowledge into a book?
It was self-published. I call my book my glorified business card. So it's available on my website, so it can be purchased there. But for businesses, if I was going to talk to a business, so if they wanted to get me in, I leave them a copy of my book. And for a $20 book, if you're getting a consulting gig that's worth a lot more than $20, then it's successful from that perspective. I never wrote it to be a bestseller. That was never my intention of it.
No other questions yet. We'll see what, hopefully some others come in.
Yeah, and just further on that book question, if you want to drop me a line, I could put you in touch with someone who's a book coach who would help you with some of those questions that you might have.
Still all quiet on the question front.
Ooh, that's either good news or bad news, isn't it, Lorian?
Yes, well, there's still people in the session, so they haven't dropped off. That's not why there's no questions.
And just while people are looking at questions, I wanted to keep today really, really brief. I didn't want to give you too much information, but I wanted to extend this thought process of there's a deployment phase, there's an improvement phase, but there's a flexible working phase. And the flexible working, if we can get to that, and that's when you start really looking at things like 4-day work weeks. So one of the things that I thought when the pandemic hit, I thought the 4-day work week would be dead and buried. It's actually looking like it might be one of the things that gets us out of this. And the 4-day work week, the heart of the 4-day work week is productivity. So we've got to be able to do 5 days worth of work in 4. But the 4-day work week, keep an eye on that one.
You got a couple of questions now. The first one, no name attached to this one, is tips on how to get people to actually turn their cameras on in meetings. There's lots of introverted opposition. That is a question that speaks to my heart.
Yeah, I think like all protocols, that you make it as a protocol, and it's the way we do business. It's the culture. So now the individual will need some coaching, and they may need some assistance in actually getting over that. But once they do, then they're generally okay. But as I say, when we don't make things out as protocols, where we don't have, this is the rule book, this is how we do things here, then it's up to individual opinions, and we don't get consistency when that's the case.
Another question you've got here is, do you think that, quote, all companies will adopt this type of flexibility approach, or will some force people to return and not take this opportunity to embrace a different approach?
I think there'll be some organisations that go back to how they were doing things, that not everyone's going to embrace this. But it's going to be a way you'll see for organisations to attract top talent. So this will be a war on talent strategy. And some companies don't get involved in those. They say, well, here's how we do things. So it'll be a mixed bag that we'll see.
There's a question here from Sarah. For those working flexibly, for example, part-time or 2 hours a day, like in your example, how do you keep people up to date with what's going on without having a meeting? Sometimes you need to explain things because there are so many conversations and so many channels. How do you keep everybody on the same page?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is where teams are actually, this becomes part of the protocol. So some organizations, they do this, they do a quick summary video. So because they find that an easy way of doing things, of communicating. So it could be a quick 2-minute video, and as the summary of what they've been, or the questions or challenges they've had for the day. Other people will do that via a written format, or they do it within their channel, just a part within their channels. Organizations, a lot of companies are still doing their daily huddles, and that's another way of doing it. And the huddle's got to incorporate of a time slot that fits in the flexible people as well. So there's not one way or the other on that particular one, but it's a great question.
There's another question here from Cairo, which is, I've been surprised by how well people coped with working from home. How have you found the percentage of ease versus difficulty? And can you see a pattern as to why?
It really varies. So some organizations have put their head in the sand and said, oh yeah, everything's fine, whereas the people are really, really crying out. I think the hardest people, the most difficult people have been those who are homeschooling, because that's just been so challenging, or they've got young children. So that's a very broad brush category, but there are some people who are super productive who are in that area as well. The people who have coped the best have been mobile workers. So anyone who's a sales rep, who travels around, a consultant, mobile workers, they're used to actually working from different environments. So they're good at working from home. And people who've got really, really good personal productivity skills, they've been great at doing it as well.
No other questions at this point.
Okay, and I think we're just about right on time as well.
All right, so yeah, no more questions, so happy to wrap that up.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you everybody for your time this afternoon. Feel free to reach out to me via any of my contacts there, and happy to answer any further questions offline.